That's for a couple of reasons, both of which are a little bit surprising. One is actually the international trading system is open enough that with the right other things, Africa could make a big advance, for example. And I'll just give one example. Under the current trading rules, China has been able to expand its exports from $18 billion a year in 1980 to $750 billion a year last year. So an increase of roughly 40 times in a quarter century. Africa's exports are stagnant, not because the trading system wouldn't absorb more, but because Africa doesn't have the power, the roads, the competitiveness, the disease control, the trained workforce to be able to expand more. And that's why what people are talking about for the poorest countries is not so much trade liberalization as they're talking about what they call aid for trade, which is help to get the port working, help to get the power 24 hours working so a factory can be properly located there, help to get the road from the village to the factory that processes the agriculture to the port to the world market. There are a few areas where trade is very important. Our barriers on cotton exports from Africa really are an abuse, because that's a commodity where they do have competitiveness, one of the few, and yet our generous subsidies to a few thousand cotton farmers in this country, about $3 billion to 26,000 cotton farmers, has depressed the price for the poorest farmers in the world in Mali and Burkina Faso and Tanzania and Kenya. We ought to be able to do better than that. But in general, it's the resource constraint on basic infrastructure, health, education, disease control, food production, agricultural renovation, where I would put the first emphasis.
I think that distinction is helpful because the middle-income countries are in a different place.
That's exactly it. When you look at the gains, the big gains to trade, they will be important for Brazil. They'll be important for Argentina. They'll be important for Chile. No question about it, and I should have added that. Because the big countries already do a lot of trading, and a more open market for them is going to make a big difference. But the poorest countries are not connected to the market yet. So for them, it's making the connection first that's going to be the biggest.
Let me then ask this sort of internal-external question about the U.S. in two senses. If we did all we could and should do, part of what we'd have to deal with, I think, are two internal problems in the U.S. You've talked about agricultural subsidies in the industrialized countries, advanced industrialized countries. How much can we do to resolve that question? That is to say, to deal with it in terms of the burden it imposes on others, and then what would it take internally to provide help for those that would be impacted. And then perhaps more broadly than we've talked about so far, in terms of globalization as a whole, which of the advanced industrial countries does the best job to deal with when jobs are lost overseas, and where are we on that question?
Great. So first, just to give you a quantitative sense, right now we are at 0.2% of GNP in aid. It's gone up a bit, but mainly actually because of what we're spending in Iraq, Afghanistan, and so forth, which comes under the category of aid, although it's really building things that get blown up and then get built again. It's not really what I would consider development assistance. It's not very effective. The amount of aid we're spending for Africa, to give you the number, is 0.03 of 1% of GNP. That means we're sending to Africa 3 cents out of every $100 of our GNP. 3 cents. That's, since we're a $12 trillion GNP in the United States, that's a $4 billion aid level. It's not very much. In total, about half of our aid is basically to the so-called war on terror countries. So we're left with $10 billion for the rest of the world, and of that, little less than half is to Africa. Now, if we were at 0.7 rather than 0.2, we'd be an extra $60 billion a year. Is that a lot? Actually, well, by definition, it's just half of 1% of GNP. It's half of what we're spending on the Iraq War right now, that increment. So there are pretty clear sources of where we could get it. And as I stressed earlier, we could do that extra 0.5% of GNP. And if we got out of this miserable war and had a fair tax system and took care of what we need to do, we could take care of our own poor, bring everybody onto health care and so forth. So it is not ours versus theirs. There's plenty to go around, but we're talking about 60 billion short of what we promised to make as our concrete target when we agreed to the Monterey Consensus in 2002. In terms of where other countries are, 5 countries are at 0.7, and they've been there for quite a while. They are Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And all of the rest of the European Union main donors, 15 countries in all, have pledged to be at 0.7 by 2015 and to rise to 0.56% of GNP by 2010. So the European Union said, we'll get there by 2015, all of us. That's 15 countries, plus Norway, which is not a member of the European Union. That will make 16. The United States, well, we pledged it, but then we said, no, we didn't pledge it. And we don't even discuss it right now politically, but thank goodness you're discussing it, and you're going to keep it what we've said we would do, what we need to do, what the poor need, because it's absolutely appropriate on every standard. We promised it, we delivered it, and it's needed. All of those are all 3 great criteria for going ahead with what we said we would do. Sweden and Norway exemplify, in my opinion, what really, truly committed performance is, because they've made their whole national policy revolve around, their international policy revolve around the Millennium Development Goals. So they actually check each part of their legislation, including their trade policy, including their development assistance, including their environmental law. Is this consistent with the Millennium Development Goals? And they've written wonderful documents about what they call policy coherence. How do we make sure that everything we do is consistent with the international goals that we've signed up to? Again, my starting point would be, let's say the words more than once. Let's make clear that these really are our goals. And then we would make a lot more headway to do it. But we have about 60 billion per year to go right now. And there could not be a better investment in our security. Since we're spending 100 billion plus on a war that we shouldn't be spending anything on, I can tell you where some of that money should come from right away.
Fair enough. People at this conference, one of the things they know well in terms of the Catholic Church in the United States is Catholic Relief Services. Both in terms of Catholic Relief Services itself, which is deeply and broadly involved in Africa, but also in terms of the general question of NGOs, international NGOs, in different areas, humanitarian, development, and human rights. Where does that fit in the larger picture as you have seen it? What kind of role, comparative advantage do these organizations play?
Of course, the NGOs are crucial. They fill gaps partly, though they can't fill most of the gap that the government is leaving.